impacted by rising prices of gas in some parts of the country, not all, and also looking ahead to the winter season and looking at natural gas supply out there. Maybe they don't look at it exactly through that prism, but I would say we do. And so, of course, the president has asked his economic team, as they do on any range of issues impacting the public, to continue to discuss what the options are that we can take to address these shortages. Now, we know that some of the issue here is supply as a result of the pandemic, and there's a natural gas shortage around the world, hence the need for the United States to continue to export natural gas. There are a range of course, options that we can look into to help address, but I'm not in a position yet to outline anything more any additional steps we can take.
Could you say if the administration has a preferred oil price per barrel?
I'm not going to outline that from here. Go ahead.
Is there any concern in the White House that the embrace of the Fed's use of transitory at best makes your job more complicated month over month to explain what's going on with inflation? At worst, could be misleading for folks who don't necessarily get that transitory may mean a year or longer?
Well, the way we view it is that it's important to preserve the independence of the Federal Reserve, and that can give the American people and the markets confidence in what their projections and their predictions are. And that's long been how these issues have been approached throughout history. And we think that's important to continue that trend. Transitory, I guess I don't have an assessment of how many people know exactly what that means or what that means to them. We know that what the Federal Reserve and Wall Street economists and others are projecting is that the rate of inflation will come down next year. What that means is that as people have seen these increase in some costs of goods over the course of the last year or so, as the economy is turning back on, and as I would note, we were turning from a period of time where the unemployment rate was high, people didn't have a lot of excess money and wages to spend on goods, so naturally the demand has come up over the course of the last year, that is the projection is it's coming down. So I wouldn't say it's complicated as for us. We look at things over the long term, and we know that if the American people, businesses, the markets can rely on the independence of the Federal Reserve, that's good for the economy and good for the integrity of that.
I think to put a finer point on it, I just mean that everyone was saying transitory in February and March. I understand the nuance and the economics of what's going on here.
Yes, I know you do.
But when the deceleration is happening slower perhaps than people expected a few months ago, and people are still paying 10 or 15 or 20% more for meat, and they're saying, why was it supposed to be transitory 3 months ago, 4 months ago, and we're still here? Does that make things more difficult to explain as to why that's the case?
Well, it requires us explaining, and through working with all of you as well, that the cost of meat is also related to competition and the small number of large meat producers who have a dominance over the market, and the fact that a lot of these issues are not as simple as a one-sentence explanation, and that different industries have different issues in the supply chains, different issues that are causing some increases in prices, and also because we all understand the American people are not looking at cost-to-cost comparisons from this year to 2 years ago. They're looking at cost-to-cost comparisons to their checkbooks from 8 months ago or 12 months ago. And even though factually, if you look back to 2 years ago, things may be comparative, that's not how people look at things. So our objective here is to tackle each of these issues with the approach that we think will help address it in the shortest term.
And just one more on supply chains. To what degree is the work of the task force kind of underscored just how limited the options may be for the federal government dealing with a global economic, first time coming out of a once-in-a-century pandemic type of situation right now?
Well, I think there are some realities about an economy turning back on. And moving from a period where there was low demand, where there was not the production of goods, even of a range of supplies the American people are looking for, that as it's turning back on and as demand has increased as it did, that there would be ups and downs. And that's what we're experiencing right now. And our hope and our intention is to continue to implement policies that will help address this over the long term and ensure that we can address inflation over the long term, which is exactly what the president's agenda will do.
Thanks, Jim. On the issue of wages, has the president given up on the idea of a $15 minimum wage, or is that something he still intends to pursue, and if so, when?
Absolutely. He wants to increase the minimum wage to $15 an hour. He remains committed. As you know, it was in an earlier package and then was not approved by the parliamentarian, but it is something that he's still absolutely committed to increasing. He thinks it's long overdue.
Go ahead. Thanks, Jen. I have two questions. The first is just on the rules around the employer mandates or around vaccinations.
Sure. The OSHA regulations?
Yes, the OSHA regulations, sorry, getting to the White House today or yesterday, and kind of what's next, how long you think it will take for the White House to review, since this is an emergency situation and has been framed as such, and then how long it would take to implement, like sort of what's the time frame for this actually happening now?
So we don't always typically pay attention to the OIRA process, which is understandable, but what's happened right now is OSHA, Occupational Safety and Health Administration, they created these regulations. They've been working expeditiously to develop an emergency temporary standard that covers employers with 100 or more employees. So that's, of course, what you're referring to, but just to get us up to speed here, to ensure workers who are fully vaccinated or undergo weekly testing to protect undergo weekly testing or are fully vaccinated to protect employees. So as part of the regulatory review process, what happened yesterday is the agency submitted the initial text of the emergency temporary standard to the Office of Management and Budget. And now what happens is that it will be reviewed by the Office of Management and Budget. OIRA, which is a division of the Office of Management and Budget that does regulatory reviews. We don't, as a long-standing practice, comment on the timeline of how long that takes because we want to allow that process to happen. But it should be an indication that it's there, and now it is being reviewed. And once it is finalized and through the OIRA process and review, it will be posted publicly in the Federal Register, and you will all have access to every detail of it.
Okay, one other question on a different subject. World Bank and IMF are having their annual meetings just down the street from here right now, and there's obviously a lot of questions around the leadership there. Does President Biden have confidence in the leadership of the IMF and the World Bank, given the questions about the integrity of each institution, and is he concerned about China's growing influence at the international financial institutions, where the U.S. is still the biggest contributor?
Well, I believe the Treasury Department did express concern about a report that was recently issued, so it's certainly point you to that. Otherwise, the President continues to have confidence. Go ahead.
The President's Commission on Review of the Supreme Court and Suggestion of Reforms is said to be wrapping up its work this week. Have the Commission chairs presented their findings to the President yet? Has he had a chance to review them in advance of what we expect to be some sort of public report?
Right. So here's where this stands. This is a day of processes in the government. How fun. So the Commission will release the draft preliminary discussion materials tomorrow, which is their timeline, or was their deadline, and they will meet that timeline. These have not been submitted to the White House for edits or feedback, and their release will be followed by a public meeting of the Commission on Friday. They will then form their final report and submit it to the President in mid-November. So that is the process that will transpire from here. And like we've said previously, our objective here is to allow for this process made up of a diverse range of experts and voices to move forward and represent different viewpoints. And we're not going to comment on it, or the President wouldn't comment on it until a report is final and he has the chance to review it at that period of time. If I may, let me just remind people of what they are looking at so that when you see this preliminary discussion materials released, you will know what you're looking for. The Commission on the Supreme Court is a group of about 30 members representing a wide spectrum of different viewpoints. Its mission was to evaluate a number of questions that have prompted calls for reform in a number of different areas, and importantly, it will analyze both arguments in favor and against such proposals. So the topics they're examining include the origins of the reform debate, the court's role in the constitutional system, the length of service and turnover of the justices on the court, the membership and size of the court, and the court's case selection rules and practices. And that's what they'll be looking at, which will be reflected in the preliminary discussion materials. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. On these new land border crossing rules, what happens if fully vaccinated people present themselves for asylum at an official port of entry? Will they be allowed to ask for asylum and begin their immigration proceedings?
This is the Title 19, different from Title 42. So Title 19 applies to individuals who have the proper documentation to come into the United States. So it would be a different process, and Title 42, as you know, remains in place.
The Kenyan president is meeting with President Biden tomorrow. They're going to talk about, quote, a need to bring transparency and accountability to domestic and international financial systems, which is rich, considering the revelations in the Pandora Papers that the Kenyan president owned a whole network of offshore companies. How do you square that with the fact that he's kind of a poster boy for bad behavior?
The president has a range of meetings diplomatically with leaders where he has shared interests of the United States and their country, and may also have areas where there's disagreement. And the president has been quite vocal, as you all know, about the inequities in the international system, financial system, and also domestically. That's part of his. Let me finish my answer. That's why he's proposed what he's proposed domestically. He's made no secret of that, and certainly that's something he would convey as applicable. But that doesn't mean you don't meet with people you have disagreements on. And that his view on this has been quite clear, and I